we're concerned about the 10% number at the 6th-year mark, and would like to negotiate that either to be, one, a higher number, or two, that we renegotiate at this 5-year mark of what the percentage is, because our community is very diverse, and we have geographical issues with how far Pinkerton is, and our community needs the opportunity to mend from our previous relationships and forge a new one. But at this point in time, we're concerned that the 10% number would not pass on a warrant article, and our ultimate goal is to make sure if we bring to the voters a warrant article, that it is a warrant article that we feel can pass our voters.
The 10% is the amount that's in all of our Sundance School District contracts with Hampstead, Darien, Chester, and Auburn. And we feel, and I think you feel the same if you become a member of our community, that having contracts that are consistent is very important, so that every school district is treated the same. And the 10%, and that's a historical number we've had in our contract since the early 60s.
My understanding, however, Mary, is that the two other districts, Hampstead and Chester, actually have 5%, and Derry only has the 10%. So Derry, as a larger school district with needs of its schools, wanted to have a larger percentage to be able to go elsewhere.
That is correct.
So I understand from your perspective that you have a concern that the 10% may not be accepted. And do you have any background to provide to us as to why that might be? Why might the 10% not be acceptable?
I think I'm on, yeah, I'm on. So one of the concerns we just actually spoke about a little while ago was in the contract currently, we'd actually like to define what the 10% actually is. We had some discussion with Sarah about that, where David and I, everybody was kind of tossing out what, because obviously in those first 4 or 5 years we'll have, you know, a minimum of 75 here and other kids elsewhere. So ideally, if it was 10% of the whole high school population, which was in the agreement, that would leave us a very limited number, because it would be eaten up by the kids that are already out of the district. And then the other one is, obviously, we are thinking more in line with some percentage of the 8th grade class coming in versus the whole high school population. Makes more sense because it's more definable. Like if you read the contract currently, you really don't know what the 10% means. So again, if the attorney from Pinkerton or somebody could define that, I think that would be great.
Okay, first of all, in the contract that has been proposed, the 10% does not kick in until the 2018-19 school year anyways. And historically, I will tell you that if students have started in another school district, it is best for them to finish where they are. So in 2018-19, if a student was already, let's say, in Bow or as a sophomore or junior or senior, it's only logical to leave them there, and that, I'm sure, will be acceptable to our board, because it's always been our philosophy that it's better to not transition students during that high school process.
So that is something that is not in the agreement that you were provided with, but in hearing from your counsel some of the concerns you had, Pinkerton has met 3 occasions, and in this latest occasion addressed that and would be willing to make that concession that if there are students at the time that it should transition to the 10%, which is similar to the other sending district contracts, they would be willing to add in the provisions similar to your MOUs, which is if there is a student already in another district and the student chooses to stay in that district, that they would be allowed to do so, and that then the 10% would not include those students, so that would be exclusive of them, and it would just be the remaining student population, if that helps.
So 2 things. We had actually talked about that, and I think obviously any school board, you know, I think that's a great thing. Obviously, we actually voted earlier this year because we have some kids that are in different districts this year to make sure that those kids finish there, because you don't want to disrupt their education by moving them elsewhere. So that is excellent. I guess what I'd like to do is maybe work some real numbers and talk about, I mean, if we said for the next 4 years, let's say, if we had 75 or 100 kids out, then when our freshman class went in, how many kids would be able to opt out? Because again, Tricia stated at the beginning, so we have kids in North Hooksett, where it's a long commute, especially like Northwest and Northeast, that we're concerned about. We also have the factor where we obviously because of last year, we have quite a few kids in Londonderry, which, you know, we have a sibling factor, which we talked about the other night, where, again, you have parents that will maybe have to commute a kid to Londonderry and a kid to Pinkerton at the same time, which would obviously be a nightmare. And then there's also the other factor that, obviously, we wouldn't be here if we didn't want to be Pinkerton members, but we also have the fact that we're going to have die-hard Manchester folks that love Central and West, that obviously over time they'll transition out, but a 10-year time frame, I think, whether it be loyalty or tradition or whatever, you're going to have folks, and that's why we've put these MOUs in place and have the negotiated agreement with Manchester currently, so that those folks can still attend there as well. So again, that's just why the 10% seems rather restrictive to me, and then why I'd like to work the scenario so we talk about it and actually how many kids would be able to opt out once that 10% number kicks in.
If you look at the enrollment for Hooksett as of this school year, there are 618 high school students at about 10 or 11 different locations. So if we were to calculate the 10%, it would be based on the total 618 students, when that 10% comes into effect in year 18, 19, or after those students that are currently at the other schools finish.
I have a question. In that 618, are you considering those students who have already opted to go to a private institution, or are you only considering those schools that are those students who are going to public school?
The 618 that was given out at the last meeting, I just had it a second ago. I believe that is all students, Phil, because it included Trinity as well, right? So it would be on the total high school enrollment wherever they are.
And actually, if I can just because I sense where some questions may be from the Hooksett board, is just to clarify that the 10%, as we understand, as you've just described it, is of the total high school population. So in the fifth year of the agreement as it's written, if, for instance, there were 600 total high school students, whether or not some of them may have gone elsewhere, it's still 600 total high school students. So there would be the 10% opt-out would be 60 students as of that date. But there would be the students who were attending other districts at the time of that opt-out that would continue on there. But there would be only 60 additional, and that's the total high school population. So you'd have to somehow clarify between freshmen, sophomore, junior, seniors, but it's only 60 total. I just want to make sure for our board's clarification if that's the case.
Brenda?
But I think you would have to back out those that Linda just articulated wouldn't be included, who had already started their education elsewhere under a memorandum of understanding with Londonderry or Bow or so forth. So when you were calculating the number, you'd have to back those out.
I understand that children that are going to another school would be left in the other school. I guess I just want to clarify the calculation. So in year 5, if we had, say we have 600 students total, and we have 300 students that are in other districts because of the progression that we've gone through. So now we're going to calculate for next year. So 10% are we taking 10% of 600, meaning that 60 kids from the 8th grade class could opt out? Or are we saying we're taking 10% of 600 kids, but we already have 300 placed? That's, I think, where the confusion comes, is how would that 5th year freshman class be calculated? I realize that after time, it would all even out to be 10%, but I think that's where there's some confusion.
I believe what we're talking about is that if your total high school population was 600, as you stated, 10% would be 60. That would be 60 new freshmen would have opt-out. They can go wherever they want to. The 300 you already have in other high schools through your MOUs would remain there. So you would really be putting out 360, and we would get the balance of those students.
again, I understand that concept, so, but moving on to what David spoke about, and Harry just answered a couple minutes ago, so those kids would be grandfathered, their education would finish where they're at. Now we're in the 5th year of the contract, we're talking about where it goes to 10%. So in that year, let's say just by, chance, we have 60 kids that opt out, which is our full 10% amount. And so then the next year, our full high school population, we had talked about our school population is 600. That number doesn't change. So if we've already used up 60 slots, that subsequent year, there's no slots, right? That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to get to.
It appears correct pursuant to your calculations, and I think on a year-to-year basis, the school, I'll allow somebody here to speak to that, but the school would do a calculation of how much your total student population is, how many were allowed on the flexible opt-out where they didn't count, and how many slots would be left for the remaining 10%. Is that correct? So it's a year-to-year calculation?
Right, but when the graduating seniors, theoretically, I think that it would be enough.
Because you would have students who had graduated, and you would have an influx, and so it remains to be seen what whether there would be new slots open.
Yeah, I guess, I do, and just to clarify, I think, and what the explanation is that, so you have you use the 60 slots that first year. The next year, the number of slots depends on how many of your kids have graduated that use those 60 slots. So if you use your 60 slots to go elsewhere, but none of them graduated from those other schools, then yes, you're not going to have, and the total enrollment numbers stay the same. You're not going to have any more slots. But if 40 of them graduated, because most of them were in senior class, then you're going to have a lot more slots. So that's going to vary depending on which classes are at what stage of their education.
So if we're in year 5 and we're all done with the 75, so we're kicking in the 10%. So we have 600 students, so we have 60 opt-out slots. If we took all 60 of those opt-out slots in that freshman class, then we'd move to the next year. I don't think we'd gain any because those graduating seniors weren't counted as opt-outs, because none of our opt-outs would graduate for 3 more years because we opted them out as freshmen. So the ones that are graduating were not from say another school, they were covered under the MOUs. So really, if we wanted to be fair, and this would be on our end, we would have to look at 15 kids a year to keep a consistent number so that we weren't prejudicing one class with opt-outs and not the other, because if we gave up those whole 60, we're locked in unless there's somebody moves out of district or something like that.
I'm seeing a head nod over here from the headmaster, so I'll let her address that.
I think your calculations are correct. That's right. If all 60 were the first year in the 5th year of the agreement, the students that were at other schools would just finish at other schools, but you wouldn't be able to the next year add to that 60 because it would be 60 totally. Yes, I agree with you on that.
Would you not achieve the same end if starting with 2018, giving that date out of this proposal, that you identified that percentage for the freshman class? Meaning, in 2018, all but 10% of the freshman class would come here. 2019, all but 10% of the freshman class would come here. And then over that 4-year period, don't we transition out the youngsters in MOUs and achieve that 10% in a way that the public would understand it? And therefore, David's calculation of about 15 per class makes some sense.
I agree with Phil. I think the end result would be the same because if it's 10% the first year at 175, it would be 17 and 17 and 17 all the way through. So that doesn't add up to 60. So this must be, 175. It's about 175 would be 700 high school kids, and that's, so basically your concept is right, in my.
But am I incorrect in thinking that if you only attach the 10% to the incoming freshman, it deprives of a student in their sophomore, junior year who chooses to opt out for alternative reasons to be part of the 10%? Because what I'm hearing was just 10% of the freshman class, rather than 10% of the total student population.
But if you go 10% for 4 years, it's 10% of the total. It's still 10% of the total at the end, right? I'm a finance person, and I think it's 10% of the total, but you go 4 years in a row.
Okay. All right, so you're asking the board to consider the 10%.
The one difference, I think, for discussion would be in mid-year, if, say, 2 Hooksett students transferred out of Pinkerton. In the big calculation, they would have used up 2 slots for the incoming freshmen. If we do strictly freshmen, it is more to our benefit because you're basically not counting those 2. If you're saying, just 10% of the incoming freshmen, you're pretty much ignoring if people want to opt out. And that's okay with me, but I just for discussion, I think that's where the difference comes about going to just freshmen only or the whole school population. Because we haven't really discussed that issue. If we assign, and we're going to assign 75 kids to come here, or all but 10%, what if there's a transfer? That skews the next year's number. So I think we should just think about that. I like the freshman class number better because I think it's more to our advantage.
In recognition of what was represented to you by your superintendent and by your board chair and legal counsel, that there were concerns about immediately going into an opt-out. That is why there's the provision to say for this period of time when you have MOUs with other districts, Pinkerton will honor that concern that you have for your citizens and your students by allowing that and not requiring that. However, at some point, we hope the decision will be, yes, this is your school of your district, and therefore, as is similar to the other contracts that will eventually take over. And again, hopefully your students will want to be here, but we recognize that.
I would say for myself, as a person who's not supporting the contract because of the 10%, and to be forthright, I don't know that some of our issues go away in a transition because of geographical things that are not going to change. We have a lot of people that are on the border with Bow and in the north end with Pembroke. So I think you might call it a normal situation, it might be an easier transition, but I just don't want to misrepresent our community. If it were just getting used to a different school, I think that's true. But some of these factors I don't think are going to change, and we're trying to predict how the community is going to accept this and so forth. So as a school board member, I don't want to misrepresent our position and say that I think we can get to 10% in 5 years, because I really have some serious doubts that that's going to go over with our community. I think that the 75 is very reasonable, and I appreciate the offer and the exception that you don't have in another contract. And I respect your 10% and I respect your institution. I'm just trying to anticipate what Hooksett is going to feel about that and how as a board we are going to manage that number. Thank you.
And I think in response to that, likewise, it won't be for just 5 years based on what has been discussed here and what the board discussed after it provided you with that. It's going to be more like 8 years, because there will be the additional 3-year period when the students are already in other schools under their MOUs, and it will be, those students will not be counted. So it will be a longer period than just the 5 years.
So
went over that last calculation. Unless we stayed at 15 a year in year 5, we're going to disadvantage our own children, because if we use up our slots, then we're not going to equally be able to hand them out.
But I think it was starting with the given of the 600 students. The 600 students would have backed out of it the students who are already in MOUs for previous years. So that number's probably going to come down to, maybe 400 students, if I understood your position correctly.
Yeah. I just want to be clear though, because I thought we cleared it up that, in year 5, going back to the example of 600 students, we have 60 slots to opt out. And if we used all 60 of those in that freshman class, we would be done. So from our perspective, to be fair to our classes, we would probably only want to give 15 opt-outs so we can consistently have 15 opt-outs a year. So I do think that the restriction practically kicks in year 5 for us. I know we could do something different, but that would jeopardize our position of being fair with our students and consistent. So from my perspective, it really is year 5, although the numbers we could front load that if we wanted to.
I think that's fair, and I think it would require some further discussion, perhaps with council, to try to arrive at something that may be acceptable to both on that. But I think we understand that concern.
So, item number 1, so Lisa, I guess we were talking about, so I think of these MOUs, they're somewhat transitional, but like David said, there are going to be some folks that are geographically challenged beyond that 5-year period. So the MOUs, even though they're not tuition contracts, my thought process is that they're not necessarily a temporary bridge. There'll be people that want to be able to use those beyond the 5 years, and who knows what happens if we renegotiate with a new board, etc. So that's one point. And then also, again, to the school speaking for itself, if we talk about the fact that the kids are going to love it here, and we talk about, again, being very liberal with the first bunch of years, allowing a bunch of kids to opt out during this transition period. But I don't see what's wrong with, again, just talking about the fact that having in the agreement that we sit down at 5 years and look at what's occurred, and negotiate then and talk about the 10% or whatever number we're going to get to. But we have a better track record then. We really, like David said, we're really trying to guess. We have a lot of different interests in our community, a lot of different folks coming in. And again, it's not the fact that Pinkerton is not a great school. I obviously think it's a great school. My son's here. But again, those distance limitations aren't going away from the north end to Hooksett. And again, I think the school speaks for itself. If we get to 5 years and we just talk about the fact there's a clause in the contract that says we'll rediscuss or we'll talk about the number of kids that can opt out, I don't think that's unreasonable. I just think, again, it'll be tough for us to get past the voters. It isn't really, at the end of the day, what we all like. It is to get it to the voters, but to get it through the voters versus, like, we're talking about obviously doing a tuition agreement, and I guess there's, and obviously making sure kids that are slated to attend here can attend here after that, whether or not the agreement goes through. But for us to feel that it's going to pass the voters, I think the 10% will be a tough one for us. And again, I'm an advocate of the school, but I just think going from those numbers, even if we come in with somewhere in between, or something a little bit better, again, I'm not saying there's a line in the sand or whatever, but again, at the end of the day, I want to do something that's going to pass the voters and Hooksett. And I just think, we were talking tonight, David was talking about, like, doing the math, etc. It sounds like we've kind of hashed that out. But again, at the end of the day, 5 or 6 years from now, only 17 kids can go elsewhere. In the next 2 or 3 months, we're going to have to go out there and discuss that with folks. And I don't think, and I'm going to say glasses half full, reasonable guy, but I think that going from the number that we're going to have to that number is going to be a problem. That's all.
I apologize to anybody that this meeting was misrepresented. This meeting was represented to us, and I'm not saying by the trustees, but by our own council and our council that's here tonight, as to be a decision-making meeting to come here and either leave with an agreement or not. And that's the way I came to this meeting. And now it appears that we are going to extend the process. And what we heard from Hooksett was they wanted an answer. I'm ready to have an answer tonight.
We do not have a full board here on this diocese. We will be taking the information that we gathered here this evening and taking it back to the full board for discussion and vote.
Similar to David's point, but not quite the same. I want to be able to come out of here tonight to give our parents some confidence about next year. We're running out of time. I mean, we have budget concerns coming up that we have to address because, we have to get our budget in. I mean, our chairman of the budget committee is in the audience. So we have that concern and the concern of getting the 8th grade parents and getting these kids assigned. So, and I, when I was here last week when they did the open house, I was talking to Mary and Harry, and again, time is of the essence here, so we just want to be able to come out of here and be able to give our parents something concrete, because again, we keep saying, well, we'll wait, you're going to see, and people are reading the paper, and we need something solid to come back with, so that's my only concern.
And I think Jim has a question and comment, and then David.
I have 2 points. One, this meeting was clearly represented as bringing all the decision makers together so that we could either enter an agreement or not to bring closure to this issue or to bring a new relationship tonight. So I think that, and I'm not laying blame on anybody that they're not, but that was clearly the way that we have been portraying this meeting for the last week. And when I'm saying that I want to vote, clearly we can't vote on an agreement, I guess, unless we vote no. But I would rather vote whether we're going to continue or not versus polling. And that's what I was asking the question about. Because if we're going to continue, I think we need an official roll call vote here. Because the continuing itself is a major issue on our board of whether we have reached the end of our timeline for this year. We have already said once that we have, and then we decided to have this meeting because there was some hope that we may come here and make a decision. Now we're facing more possible negotiations. So I think we need to be on the record and clear whether the Hooksett board wants to continue or whether we don't.
No, I will tell you that it was clearly represented to me as late as this today that this meeting was solely for discussion purposes. Our entire board is not here. We had representatives of our board to be here. So it was only intended to dialogue between the 2 boards. I don't know what was represented from the Hooksett side, but council had discussions that this was a meeting for discussion purposes only. Does that help?
And I'm just looking for that clarification that however that is described, it seems as your will in the end, whatever year we calculate it to be, it will be 10%. That the board, the Pinkerton trustees, is not willing to move from 10% to any other percentage or any other number. Is that a fair statement as we stand here?
I think that's very fair, because if we concede that event, then we have to now renegotiate all our other contracts. And they're at varying stages in those contracts as to how far they progressed in those contracts. We've been trying to be fair, very fair with all of our sending towns, that whatever concessions that we make to the new school coming into our system, that we offer that same concession to all the other sending districts. And that
to the board of Hooksett, I think that we've had a very good discussion here, and I think that there have been some concessions and understandings made by the Pinkerton board. But as we approached this from the very beginning, it was always the 10% that was the problem. And I respect their limit is 10%, but I think we need to come to the reality that that's why this board has not accepted this contract, and that they are not going to change that. We may determine how it's calculated, that may tweak it a little bit, but fundamentally nothing has changed in the big picture of why we have, rejected this idea really twice now. So I would urge that we bring closure here, and we maybe revisit this for the following 15-16 year when we have more time to really vet these things out, include the public, and see if really we can work within that 10%. Because right now, I don't have a feeling as a Hooksett school board member that that's going to work for us.
Yes, John.
I just want to add to that, my Alzheimer's kicked back, and I remember that second point. All I was going to say is right now, Hooksit's in a position we're looking for long-term partners. Pinkerton Academy is very favorably looked upon in our community. You have a lot going for you. You got a lot of people that are attending here that have so much positive to say about this place and everything about it. The educational facility here. We struggle with things like transportation, but that's our job to handle those things and make sure the kids have equal access to the major anchor schools, which we're proposing that you be one of them. As David said, the sticking point on this board, which is where we rejected this tuition agreement before, and nothing has changed. We have some concessions, as David said, but nothing has really changed for the Hooksett voter. It's unfortunate, but I don't think it means the end of a relationship. I just think it means the continued fine-tuning of what that long-term relationship is, because I think if we rushed into something that upset the Hooksett voters, like I said before, I think that would be a detriment to our long-term relationship. It may be a good short-term fix, but to our long-term relationship, I think it would be a detriment. Thank you.
Yes, Phil.
Still on, that's a good thing. So I guess my thought process is, obviously, we came here tonight looking to be in better shape than we were. There were actually 2 items. One of them was taken care of right away, which was the language that was in the MOUs, because obviously if you want to be our anchor, you have to take every kid, right? You can't pick and choose. And there was one clause. So that was one thing that went away, which was great. Along these lines, like I say, I think we've added a year tonight and talked about some other items. And we talked about the fact that prior to the meeting here, at the end of the day, I guess our job is to get the best agreement that we can. And then at the end of the day, let the voters decide. We've heard that a lot lately where people are just like, get it done. We should have the ability to vote it up or vote it down. So based on the items we have tonight, and I was a vocal opponent in our meetings, that the 10% bothered me. Again, at the end of the day, everybody should walk away from a negotiation feeling they got a little something. So I feel like I have gotten a little something. Hopefully the Pinkerton folks feel like they've gotten a little something. So I'm in a decent place.
And if there being no further discussion, I'll call this to a vote. All those in favor of moving forward?
Can I request a roll call vote?
Absolutely.
Cheryl Laxton,
Yes.
Phil Demo,
Yes.
Thomas Starnes,
No.
David Burrow,
No.
and Trish Wilkins.
Yes. It was a 3-2 vote to proceed.